a very good team with me. I have three people with me today who I know that have a lot to talk about natural resources and sustainability. It's an honor to have you here with me. I have Ricardo Faria with me, who is the founder of Faria Grange and the founder of Insolo, and he's the owner of this company, which is one of the largest producer of eggs in Brazil. So thank you for being here with us. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a privilege to be here with you. Good afternoon, Leontino. Good afternoon, Plinio. Good afternoon to the entire audience who is here with us. I would like to start. Ricardo, let me just present the other participants quite quickly. I'd like to present Leontino Baldo, who is the director of the São Francisco plant, natural from Sertãozinho. And I was talking to Francisco because the United Nations included his business as one of the 30 most sustainable business in the country. So it is a great thing to have Leontino here with us, a person who does such an amazing job. We also have Roberto Pini, who is director of agricultural development of the Nova Era Institute. And Roberto is an agronomist, graduated by Exalc, and Roberto is a very well acknowledged specialist in agroforestry projects. So I'd like to give the floor to Ricardo, and before I give you the floor, I believe that the subject here, that is the water and soil preservation. I'm also a producer in the countryside of São Paulo, Mato Grosso do Sul, and I believe that we producers have spoken quite often about preservation. And why is that? Because I'd like to mention a point here, and I believe that there is something you should also mention, the work of Embrapa. We are very much guided by science and research, and also low carbon livestock. I think that this continuous search that we have towards productivity, and it touches the point of productivity and fertility. So the precision agriculture, the preservation of soil and water, which is the of our panel, and the direct plantation and the low carbon absorption. There's also a very frequent point that is being mentioned, that is the reduction of impacts with the use of defensive products. I think it has to do with what you commonly say. I think that we are more and more looking for more efficient molecules, and there is also the point of biotechnology and bio inputs. I think that the producers of today are looking for that, and there is also the point of sustainable livestock raising. Well, so Ricardo, just so that we can start, this is why I have mentioned all these subjects, and I'd like to give you the floor now. Okay, so again, thank you. I would like, no, let me talk about the things that we do at the Faria Grange and Insolo.
De ovos do Brasil.
We are one of the largest producers of eggs in Brazil, and we have a daily production of 10 million eggs. Around 14 million birds that are spread around 20 granges in Brazil, and Insolo is the junction, the merging of two companies, Terros and Insolo, that creates the fifth largest set of lands in Brazil, where we, in the next harvest, we intend to plant 180 million acres of land. So how can that survive? You can imagine that Insolo is located in a region that is called Matopiba, and this is a region that has a water stress that is huge. This is where we are located. Some of our areas get less than 1200 millimeters of water, of rain per year, and still Insolo is able to harvest 2 crops a year. So, and in these areas where we get our crops, we intend to reach around 60,000 hectares of corn being planted. So all the subjects that were previously discussed regarding sustainability, soil profile, organic fertilization, and which without which Insolo would not survive. So basically, this is our group in numbers. We have around 110,000 hectares, 10 million eggs a day in regions where a long time ago people were not thinking about planting, and very little time ago people were not thinking about having 2 crops being harvested a year. And we have finally overcome these old paradigms and proved by means of a lot of research, a lot of science and technology and investments that yes, it is possible to get these results, because technically the soybean plant, when it's well distributed, it needs around 500 millimeters of water, and the same applies to corn. So the thing is, how can we fit these things here in terms of the soil and fertility so that we can get a good result and a plausible result? I'd like to stand up for a while so that things can get more exciting. How does Insolo do that? The first of our motto is the digitalization. I like to say that you cannot execute agriculture in such large areas. Can you imagine that we have a farm that's called Ipe, and from side to side it has 100 kilometers, and if we look at the off-season crops and the regular crops, we plant more than 100 hectares. How can we know what we are doing without digitalization? What can we do about that? We have the 4G technology available there, and at Insolo, at the Ipe farm, we were proud enough to have become the first farm that is 100% 5G in the country. And what does that bring us? This gives us convenience and speed when it comes to managing the equipment throughout these very large areas. So we are able to work on the maintenance in a faster way. We avoid overlapping. And what is the advantage of not doing overlapping, Leontino? We save on diesel costs. We compact the soil less. So by means of the digitalization, we can reduce the occurrence of overlapping in more than 80%. We are able to improve the use of these machines in 20%. We are also able to reduce the consumption of diesel in 30%. So these are all sustainable measures that, by means of this unified study and an available technology, we are able to use these resources so that we can finally achieve a more sustainable agriculture. The second point that we would like to mention here has to do with the precision agriculture. Try to imagine what are the cerrado, these biomes here in Brazil. These are soils that are very old, which have suffered from the weathering effects throughout the years. We should not forget that we are in a tropical region where it rains a lot during a certain period of the year, and the sun is very strong on these regions. These are very unfavorable areas to this effect of weathering, this weathering process. So with the use of precision agriculture, we are able to provide more nutrition, more limestone to these areas that demand more of these inputs. So we have all areas being monitored in divisions of 4 by 4 hectares, and we can generate these maps that points to us the use of our inputs in a more assertive way. Another point that I would like to mention to you here, InSolo uses currently more than 40,000 hectares of area being fertilized by organic fertilizers that are truly 100% fertilizers. These are the result from the manure of chicken plus the addition of phosphated rock and the development that took us so long of certain microorganisms that are specialized in solubilizing these phosphated rocks. So there are several of our areas, considering these 180,000 hectares, in 40,000 of them we are using organic fertilizers so that we can improve the life cycle of the soil, we enhance its profile as we enhance the distribution of the fertilizer, because it is quite different when you use a soluble fertilizer, a water-soluble fertilizer, where after the third occurrence of rain, the most of the effect is dispelled, is cancelled. You should not, be scared if in a single night 140 millimeters of rain hits the soil in one of these areas. So the use of organic fertilizers that have their solubilization at a slower pace, this is much more interesting than simply using fertilizers that are water soluble. And you can ask me, why, Ricardo, don't you do everything? If you hadn't enough organic fertilizer in your region to use that. Yes, absolutely, we would do that if we had that available. Try to imagine again, let's go back in time just a little. For us to explore the agriculture in areas that are under these risks of water stress, we should have very good soil profiles. So people at Mato Grosso that have a large availability of water have profiles around 10, 15, 20 centimeters. We at InSolo, we employ 40 centimeters. So our use of limestone and organic fertilizers and even soluble fertilizers is slightly greater than in other regions in Brazil.
But this allows us, in a region where our relief is very favorable, to have an off-season crop, while other areas they harvest 1,000 hectares per machine. Some of my machines in Piauí are harvesting, Leontino, more than 6,000 hectares this year. So regarding another something that I would like to mention here, something else that I would like to mention here is that defensive products, organic defensive products, InSolo today uses in more than 25,000 hectares 100% organic defensive products, letting go completely of any type of chemical defensive products. And in the 180,000 hectares planted, any type of organic fertilizer. So in all of our area, we use at least some type of organic fertilizers, and in 25,000 hectares, we use 100% organic fertilizers. And again, the same question, why not 100%? Because for such, we need training, these biological defensive products are different from chemical products, because the chemical products will kill any kind of pests and fungi and eventually will have on your crops. The organic fertilizers, the biological fertilizers, we need to start applying them before. So this technical knowledge of our team and development of the supply chain over time, the expertise of the employees and operators regarding the type of fuel that we're using is as important as the use and development of these chemical fertilizers themselves. So for us, it's a continuous improvement process, but it's also a continuous process of gathering more knowledge. So this is our big challenge within Insolo, is to gather this internal knowledge and apply it to our human resources. So our goal in this sense is very bold. Last year we have 12,000 hectares of that we used only organic fertilizers, and this year we have 25,000 hectares, and next year 45,000 hectares of areas in which we use 100% organic defensive products. So this is a little bit of our development program regarding these defensive products, the reactors, how it all works, and 100% of the production of these organic defensive products are on farm. We don't use any multinational company or to assist us with this production. So with this development, all the research is done internally. Also, an important subject to mention here, there's been a law project recently on the Federal Senate, which they wanted to prohibit farms from developing their own biodefensive programs. And this is not right, this is not cool, but the good news is that in an organized way, by means of all of our organizations, institutions, associations, we have discussed this subject, and they have already agreed that farms should be prohibited from commercializing these defensive products, not developing them. So this will generate a lot of knowledge over the next 10 to 20 years. If we have 5,000 people, for example, developing these products, or if we have 5 or 6 multinational companies developing, I think it's much more intelligent, much more reasonable to really have more people have access to this and be able to work with these products to develop them. And 14 times cheaper. Yes, thank you. Excellent contribution. So I'm going to tell you some figures now that sometimes people make some confusion here. ESG with cost increase, and this is not true. ESG and sustainability and cost reductions and increased productivity. Let's say we have our own record this year after the massive use of organic fertilizers. In the same area, we harvested 66.5 bags of soy and corn and an average. So the use of these organic fertilizers and the use of biological defensive products, it's not linked to reduced productivity at all. If implemented correctly and a well-balanced way, it's a win-win-win situation. The consumer wins because it's a healthier product. The producer wins because has better productivity, and the soil, the microbiome of the soil will also win because it will be recovered. So second crop as a rule, right? Within our company, the company has adopted that we want to have 50% at least as a second crop. Of course, respecting all of the specific windows. And for that, it's a circular economy, right? That includes the digital world. There's no sustainable agriculture without the digital part. We really need the speed to grow our crops. When we have the best windows, when the rain season starts, we need to start quickly. And when the product is ready, we need to harvest it and then again plant again, grow again. And this means a lot of carbon credits for us. This also means that we're able to produce foods on a smaller areas, more foods in smaller areas, and less fuel consumption, and more food with less suppression of the natural vegetation. So for us at InSolo, this integration between soil and the environment and water is very important. If let's say that we have 1200 millimeters, if I had only one crop, I would use the resources much more other than if I had two crops. And just to wrap up here, I would like to talk about inclusion, about diversity, which is something that is extremely important for InSolo, which is the definitive inclusion of women in the agricultural business. And we're not just talking about inclusion, that we have a manager there and she's a woman. No, we have women in all of our sectors inside the company. We have women, for example, operating the tractors. We have women at our human resource managements. For example, the manager who developed the biodefensive project is a woman, and we have women also at our workshops, mechanical workshops. So we have approximately more than 20% of inclusion of women in the workforce, which in the agribusiness is extremely high. We've been being awarded as best place to work successively in the agricultural sector year after year, and our policy of inclusion at InSolo is part of our DNA and is part of our roots. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ricardo. Great presentation. At the moment that we are living in our country, a lot of unemployment, 33 million people below the line of poverty, and you're talking about inclusion, diversity, more than 20% of women in your workforce. This is really special. I like just talked about the best place to work as well, but you started talking about agriculture 4.0, 5.0. You talk about precision agriculture and other things that Leontino will discuss as well, organic fertilizers and biodefensives. That's great. So now, Leontino, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leontino. I'm a stubborn guy, and I was born stubborn, and I'm gonna die stubborn. I was born in a farm, and when I was 7 years old, I was holding one fishing rod on my right hand, and on the left hand, I was holding a rock, and the alligators came to get all the fish that I caught. So I had that rock in my hand. Alligator 3 meters long. I was 6, 7 years. There was no supervision. I was there catching the fish and throwing the rocks at the alligator. So I was kind of Mowgli, the wolf boy. So to fish I used to catch the fish with my hand as bait, and they would bite my hands, and I would pull the fish out of the water. And I thought that was great. My fingers were all bleeding when I got home. They get all inflamed, but I used my hand as bait to catch this fish. So my connection with nature comes from my childhood. I don't see nature. I am part of nature. I am earth. I am the soil. I am the animals. And then, well, we go to the city, we learn English, we study agronomy, learn a lot, came out of the agronomy course, and started working in my family business. We had 2 power plants. After 3 years working, I said, hey, this sugarcane burning is absurd. This is not right. Talked to my father and my uncles of traditional Italian family. We had to arrive at the power plant at 4:30 a.m. 20 years, no holidays, no Saturdays, working and Sunday until noon. We need to harvest the sugarcane raw. It's the most efficient plant to remove carbon from the air. If you produce 100 tons of sugarcane, you need 3 kilograms of nutrients. 99.5% is biomass that you're removing from the atmosphere. And we would burn the sugarcane because there was no other. And my father said, let's see what he can do. I was 24. And if I'm able until 70 harvest the raw sugarcane, then it's okay. The harvester was really bad at the time. And so there's a mechanic. We started changing the machine, and the factory owner didn't believe that they would harvest the raw crops, and until we did it in 1989. I got other machines, adapted them as well. In 94, we would harvest 70% of the area, one of the power plants of raw sugarcane, when any other producers even have this type of machine. So this created a law in the state of São Paulo, which was based on a study that I conducted for the ministry. And now it benefits at least 45 million people in the States. But when I was 29, I looked at that and I said, wow, this, what am I going to do now? I should be 70. Everything happened so quick. So now I'm going to try to remove the herbicide. And let's remove the chemical fertilizers. And then I said, wait, let's produce organically. And I studied about organic production, and I realized that Britain sent Albert Howard. He was a graduate from Cambridge. He went to India to introduce chemical or fertilizers in India, which was invented by Justus von Liebig, a German chemist, and he came to the experimental station there in India, and he grew all the plants and took the chemical fertilizers, sulfate, nitrate, and phosphates and so on, and he had problems in everything, pests in everything. And the native Indians who were working there said, it doesn't happen at my house. And what do you use? Yeah, I don't know. Here, each house has a cow. The cow is sacred, so we get the cow droppings, and we mix, we do the compound, and we use that as fertilizer. But why do you use that? I don't know. My father did, my grandfather did, my great-grandfather did it. And why didn't they know it? They didn't know because real agronomy came from the Middle East more than 2,000 years ago. I'm not going to say the name of the agronomist, but he created agronomy there in the Middle East. So they produced peaches the same way as we produce peaches today, but with the expansion of the Roman Empire, where Romans they went there, they learned these techniques, and they systematized it, and they imposed it to the worlds that they conquered. And during this time, for 700 years, agronomy did not develop. It was based on these Roman manuscripts that taught how to produce these products, but without any development. agronomic development came back into fruition in the United States when they used limestone and obtained great results, and then came to Europe. I'm going back to that in a second. So when I saw that, Albert Howard came to Europe and created the organics production system based on the traditional system that was already existing and used the cow droppings. So if I'm going to produce without herbicides and chemical products, I'm going to have to have a livestock cows there to. Okay, I was able to harvest the raw sugarcane, but now we need a lot of livestock to enable our organic production of sugarcane. So I was lost as an agronomist. I was lost. I entered the forest there, which is sacred for me, and I was lost. And I started to dig the ground, and I saw that the ants did not eat the leaves. There was a natural order there. There were some rules there. You eat who eats who, when they eat. So I needed to study nature to understand how this works. And I realized that if you're able to protect the plants, that's where you have life in your soil. So I had to bring the life from the soil to the agricultural environment and feed it. So I started not using fertilizers with the sugarcane, but just feed the soil, because there's some intelligence there. There's a connection in all of this environment. And I started studying, and the first thing I learned is that Europe were the protagonists of this modern agriculture between 1865 and 1867. There are several debates about two great scientists, Justus von Liebig, who defended chemical products, and Julius Hensel, who also a reputable scientist. He said, no, let's grind the stone and use it in the field, because we have life in the soil and they will oxidize this rock and they will provide fertilizers. And he was right at that time. Both were right. But the military state was a military state, and they prohibited the book that was launched by Julius Hensel, which was only launched 130 years later, 1992. And incentivized the chemical industry to produce chemical fertilizers, which were doing fine at the time. But the problem is that you didn't have the chemical analysis to qualify and quantify the fertilizers and the doses to use. You have to do the soil analysis, and you bring this to the lab. And you bring it to the lab, it interferes with the titration methods of Julius van Billing, which we learn in the agronomy lab. So you take the samples to an oven, and you burn the whole soil to analyze the chemical part. So kill the most important piece of information that was there, the biological information. In 1867, when they privileged this system, we limited the agricultural and agronomical universe to the chemical part and left the biological and physical part aside. And we started to see the chemical thinking in the world. And this way of thinking, was predominant until 1940, with chemical fertilizers being used in North Hemisphere and countries with temperate climate, where the weather protects the soil. So their effects were not studied as well, not observed correctly. But as of the 50s and 60s, there was the Green Revolution, some technological package that systematized all this technology and allowed it to apply at large scale in every continent in the world. And this was disseminated in the tropical countries.
The Green Revolution preconizes four aspects: the use of chemicals and fertilizers, the high degree of soil compaction, the use of customized products like a Roundup or some different products that can be applied in many different crops, and genetic enhancement that gave a huge contribution to agriculture. So when that was applied, it had a huge success. We can say that there was an exponential increase in the productivity because the active structure of the soils had been preserved by the traditional production systems. It used to be very common to produce in Europe having goats and sheep eating on fields, eating the remainings of certain crops and then fertilizing the soil with their manure. So from the decade of the 1950s we had an exponential increase in the productivity, but we began to lose the active biostructure of the soil. And what is that? There are bacteria, lichens, and small insects that produce a sort of protein glue that form small spheres that are called lumps. These lumps adhere one to another, and that gives to the soil its spatial geometry, which will determine the water infiltration levels and how much water it can retain. So forest soil can retain up to 450 liters of water per cubic meter of soil. Our soils are losing its biostructure and therefore are losing the ability of retaining water. So what have we learned? This glue, after 60 years of intensive and chemical agriculture, this glue is dissolving itself and soil particles are being dissolved and the clay is beginning to clog the gaps of the soil. So now in direct plantation we are seeing that the soil is collapsing. It is losing its ability of retaining water. It is being eroded quite easily. It is losing its ability of sustaining life. This is the long-term impact of the Green Revolution package, as Ricardo mentioned. So I had to study for many years. I studied for 12 years how life was formed in Earth, how lichens and other organisms were developed. So I studied Darwin, I studied Alexander Humboldt. So I had to study all these things to understand that throughout the evolution of life on Earth, there is an order, there are rules. And I realized what were the standards, the patterns, and I began to develop agricultural practices that meet these requirements. I call these patterns and practices as ecologically compatible practices. So there is a continuous monitoring of productivity. This is a work that is done together with CPC of Copersucar and we against very large sugar producing groups. They send their productivity levels per variety, per type of soil, per production environment, and our production throughout the last 26 years is 25% higher than the average of these groups, and we don't use any chemical fertilizer whatsoever. And we learned that for you to increase the level of organic matter in the soil, you have to decompose lignin naturally. And another very important point that we found out was that when you feed a plant naturally, it activates a mode that is called photosynthesis. So these tissues that are constituted in the plant, it is almost impossible for bacteria, fungi, and insects to digest. When we found that, we learned to sort of manipulate the physiology of plants. And when you fertilize a plant with urea and certain agrochemicals, and this plant has to metabolize products that are not natural. It spends energy, and therefore it builds short protein molecules to form its tissues, and there are free amino acids in its sap. One of the fruit flies is attracted for up to 14 kilometers of distance by these substances that are produced by the plant. So we found how to activate a sort of a secret resistance mechanism in these plants. We handle around 50,000 hectares of sugarcane plantations. We have spent almost 5 years without finding a plant that was being eaten by ant or any other insect. We have no termites or other insects. If I had more time, I could explain to you all the science behind what we are doing. And this is something that we barely see in the mainstream agriculture, because the evolution of living organisms throughout history, throughout the geological eras, happened by means of collaboration. When we isolate agriculture as being a merely chemical activity of nature, we have prevented the collaboration of fungi, bacteria, and animals. Just for you to have an idea, 90% of plants in nature, they depend on relationships with fungi. They allow the presence of fungi in their roots, in their cells, and they allow a mutual relationship where these fungi are deeply present. So a tree that has its radicular presence around several meters around the root, it can then exploit an area that can reach several kilometers. So that is essential for the maintenance of an ecosystem. And why don't we promote this symbiotic cooperation in agriculture? And we have been doing that in our agricultural practices for 25 years, and we are producing 25% more sugar cane than in conventional practices at a cost that is 25% lower. So I will be glad to answer any questions. Thank you, Leontino. That was very good. Water, okay. Ricardo began this panel and you have contributed, and before I give the floor to Roberto, you mentioned practices that are ecologically compatible. I think that's quite important. The natural order of nature is quite interesting and refreshing to hear that. The life in the soil, this intelligence that the life in the soil has, and this connection. But I think that the most exciting thing that you said is that you don't see nature, you're a part of it. I really want to thank you for bringing that. Would you give me just 1 more minute? Yeah, sure, 2 or 3 more minutes. I was talking about results in terms of productivity, but it's been 20 years that we could not be, trying to sell ourselves. This is not something that our marketing department tells us to do. This is about the results. I looked for Embrapa for a satellite monitoring, and we had a cooperation agreement, and since 2002 we have performed the largest study on vertebrate fauna on agricultural practices, and there has been the collaboration from 17 scientists from many acknowledged institutions here in Brazil. We have doctors in ecology, zoologists, And these professionals have quantified and qualified the fauna. They found out that the entire network that is present in a natural forest was reconstituted by this single crop of sugarcane. They found out that the wolf has where to go when he wants to find certain food, and if you change the environment of production, if you change the landscape, you can cause certain disorders of behavior to these wolves. The problem is not about having a single crop or two crops, but it is how you handle it. It is about the management. So in Europe, people say, oh, soybean is bad. No, there is no bad plant or soybean or whatever. There is bad practices of management of these crops. We have wells that were drilled up to 30 meters in depth, up to the stone and rocks. We have vacuum pumps getting water off these wells and comparing the quality of the underground water with other springs. And the quality of the organic sugarcane plantation we have is even better, because we have a bioreactor with 20 tons of straw being decomposed naturally, and that helps to purify the waters. And there we find microorganisms like amoebas and others which metabolize chemicals that come with the rain. So yeah, we do have the monitoring of the qualification and quantification of the ecosystem services, because the soil should be providing ecosystem services, and we are monitoring that with national and international institutions, of course using scientific methodology. Absolutely fantastic, Leontino. Great.
Só animou aqui de te ouvir. Passar para o Roberto. Roberto,
So I'd like to give the floor to Roberto. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say that it's a great privilege and honor to be here with you, participating in such an important conference, a historical event that has as its motto food security, climate change, and sustainability. And these are all subjects very important worldwide. And yeah, finally, sustainability. I'd like to present to you in this panel, there is the sub-subject that is how can we use better and preserve natural resources, water and soil. So following this logic, yeah, there's sustainability of the agricultural practices for us to be able to preserve the environment. It's not only about the preservation of natural forests. There is the RED mechanisms of non-degradation of preserved areas, and it's quite important that we have agricultural systems that can be much more sustainable. If we are talking about sustainability, we should be thinking of a tripod. Sustainability can only exist when it is environmentally feasible, but also when it is economically feasible and when it is socially feasible. Just like the stool that I see in front of me. If you take one of its legs, it can't stand up. So it is a challenge talking about new paradigms, because we should face certain habits and knowledge that, can be quite traditional. I can imagine my colleagues in the same age as I am. Very few of them are open to these kinds of innovation and challenges. and most of them ask, how can we feed the world with these organic, fancy stuff that you have? I mean, the challenge is huge. Come on, there's a absolutely huge challenge. So, in this sense, talking about challenge, we have a enormous challenge next to a giant in Solo, for instance. They have around 180,000 hectares where they are making the transition to agroecology in a wonderful way. They are producing fertilizers, biological fertilizers, internally in their own farm. They are, sorry, I was speaking slightly far from the microphone. So they are creating an entirely new paradigm that is practical, sustainable, and profitable in a huge area. On the other hand, we have a man who deserves the Nobel Prize of Science. This man has spent years of his life studying the living things and living science. I feel touched by it because he had to go to the forest. He had to understand how nature works, and he was then able to create what he calls an ecosystem that revitalizes the agriculture. And at his farm, not only the vertebrates, there are many jaguars, which is the apex of the food chain there. So he managed to get everything that is good. He's more profitable, more sustainable, at a lower cost than his competition. So that's amazing. I think that we should be proud here in Brazil, because we're not only protagonists of being one of the largest food producers, the third largest food exporter in the world, but we are also a leading country when it comes to many sustainable technologies, sustainable innovations that have brought hope of reaching a more profitable business, of having more social inclusion, and having much greater environmental sustainability. I'd like to mention now that Brazil is a pioneer in direct plantation, non-till planting, and there is also the crop livestock forest integration, which reaches around 3 million hectares in Brazil alone, and this entire area is now under a transition to a more ecological practice, where there are certain cultures and activities being rotated, and even people who don't really care about ecology are using these practices because they're more profitable. So look, well, this is what we have here. We can remember what Ricardo Faria said, that he had to give a better qualification to workers, to labor, and the inclusion when he mentioned the higher presence of women. So this kind of agriculture requires that when it is compared to a purely chemical agriculture.
Leontino mentioned he employs 15 more workers than conventional sugarcane farms, and this is wonderful. This is something that really calls our attention. It's something that is impressive all around the world, because we have today 2 billion people starving, and we're going to discuss this later. I would like to focus here on our specialty, which is what we dedicated our work, and it's part of Instituto Nova Era, which is syntropic agriculture, which believe that it can encompass all the senses of sustainability, so it's the highest level of sustainability ever. It still has great challenges and of being able to scale into a corporate scale, to scale it up in syntropic agriculture. It's really hard to do so because you need a very sophisticated labor. The the association, Leontino worked with me a couple of years, and he felt it. He felt it in practice. He saw that when we had a more complete process, that we had more fertile plants and more productive plants. Here I'm showing some pictures that illustrate this integration between the livestock and the forest. Some pastures here with some forests in between. Here's soy with eucalyptus strips, and here is the qualification courses. To be able to work with agroforestry, you have to qualify your labor. You need theoretical courses with basic principles, with elementary language, and then go to the field where the Brazilians are really intelligent and they can learn it in practice real easy. And we are then later able to qualify these employees. Inclusion is not only necessary, and it's labor intensive. We need to include them, and this can really help with the social sustainability. In addition, our syntropic agriculture system and agroforestry system is very good for small families, for small producers. So it can be disseminated and can be used and have thousands of families working with this rural partnership systems. And this is a very good Brazilian institute. It really works well, and people get empowered. They become associates of the institute, and they become responsible for the work. And they're not there only to tag in their clock. They work on Saturday afternoon because they get benefit from the crop, from the profit. And Sunday as well, they will work even Sunday. And then the producers can tell their wives, now we're associates. So it improves our situation because now we're associates of this institute. And we are able to have a better future with that. Here are some pictures of agroforestry. You can see here an abundance of vegetation, of fertility. There are different types of arrangements, infinite types of arrangements. It depends on your interests and depend on the ecosystem and the biome in which you're developing your crops. You can see here the integration. You can see the lines of trees with corn and with broccoli and different vegetables. And here, this slide, we can see the success after 5 years of this agroforestry system in terms of soil fertility. It's amazing, it's huge, and it really, what Leontino mentioned here really happens. Ricardo Faria and Leontino talked about the science behind it, but the fertility of the soil and the profitability increase. And I'm sorry, I can't see here. Let me just check my notes. Regarding profitability, there's no doubt that the system is more profitable, and the challenge is those who doubt it should go visit one of these farms. You can see this as one of the how to do this regenerative and sustainable agriculture. We have hundreds of entrepreneurs and with hundreds of and thousands of hectares working with this regenerative agriculture. Very strong here in Brazil. And the important point here is that we don't want to criticize agribusiness as it's implemented today. It's solving a problem. It's trying. Many people don't know that there are other alternatives. They don't have the vision that these alternatives can be possible for a new paradigm. And our mission, especially the Instituto Nova Era, we propose to better the world, to serve as an example, and to show this to everyone. There are several examples in our country for entrepreneurs who really want to see this happening with more profits and more sustainability, not only environmental but social as well. And I think there's one more thing that I would like to mention. To break these paradigms, we need to do what Leontino did and what Ricardo is doing. You need to be bold. You need to have this entrepreneurship boldness, which made people leave the caves when we were cavemen. You need to be brave. You need to know that if you're an entrepreneur and you want to move into an unknown system, there's no manual of operation to have this agroecologic system. So they need to follow this path of learning, in which the business plan that they did in the beginning is not going to work so well. So sometimes we have to. The costs are higher than expected, but you see, with operational data from our farms, a lot of obstacles. But as entrepreneurs, they need to be bold, they need to be brave, and they have to have the intelligence and the culture to learn that they're going to overcome this, because they're developing a new technology to improve the whole world. And with that, they'll have the benefits, and they reap the benefits and the awards in the future. I don't have much more to comment here. I'd like to Leontino and Ricardo to complement anything if they want to. There is no doubt to use and preserve the natural resources, water and soil. We really need to maintain this tripod of sustainability. I didn't change all the slides here. Sorry. I just talked about my presentation, but that's what I wanted to say. And environmentally and economically and socially, I would like to emphasize one important point here, which is a piece of good news. I talked today with Minister Ricardo Salles, Minister of Environment, and Ricardo Salles was the former minister, Minister Joaquim. We're going to the ministry, we're going to gather a group of entrepreneurs, scientists, and agronomists to help them with COP27. I told you, Leontino, right? Because we're going to show the world that Brazil has a technology to regenerate degraded areas in Amazon, because the environmental world is just saying that we are not accountable for climate change and burnings in the Amazon. Although 85% of the Amazon is preserved, we want to, at COP27, show that we not only preserve the Amazon, we have 65% of the Brazilian territory with their original native vegetation preserved. We are the world champions in preservation in terms of ecology. We are now developing some solutions to regenerate these degraded areas from the Amazon, because it is important to do so in a profitable way and in a sustainable way environmentally. So we're going to start to include 25 million people who live in the Amazon to have a dignified life. So thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Roberto. So this is we're reaching the end of our panel. What Roberto said complemented what Ricardo and Leontino said. It's what Roberto said brings a history about the agroforestry systems, these consortiums, soil fertility. He talked about what Leontino was discussing. And something that is important is regenerative agriculture. You have been discussing this and talking about this a lot. And something that, Roberto, you talked about a new perspectives for agro, right? And you are important for this view. So now I think we have a few minutes I would like to ask Ricardo and Leontino to give their final comments because we're over our time here. So, Ricardo, it's your turn. Yes, this evolutions in sustainability, they happen over time with a lot of research, training, and scientific knowledge. This doesn't happen by means of activism or there's a good example, which is Sri Lanka. It's a beautiful country, and by means of some policy, they decided so that whole agriculture was from overnight organic. This is not going to work. We have examples of over 10 years of development and research. These evolutions, they take place gradually and with consistency. And so don't believe in legislation that is going to solve our problems and will bring us solutions overnight. These things take time, and they require the directives of each company and the beliefs of each company. And behind all of this, a lot of research, a lot of development, and a lot of science. So to contribute with so that people can really work and have a different perspective inside their companies, but we don't have to worry only about activism or fashion, because this is not overnight. It's hard work. Thank you, Ricardo. Yes, I was going to mention everything, but I was going to say about something else, but after he said, I want to continue with the same line of thought. It's not activism, it's not laws, it's knowledge. What we need is knowledge and the disclosure of this knowledge. I'm 62 years old, and when I was 50 years old, I had a way of thinking. I thought that I can't keep all this knowledge to myself. We need to share it. I need to share my knowledge. I was much more arrogant. I need to be more humble. I need to learn about other cultures. And after all I learned about my business, sugarcane, we sell 110 tons of organic products, but all organic alcohol used by Natura, Veleda, The Body Shop, is produced by us at Usina São Francisco. It's 18 million liters of alcohol in perfume bottles. That cosmetic industry want to incorporate this sustainability to compensate eventual liabilities. So at 50 years of age, I had to test myself, because everybody said, sugarcane is easy. That's easy to do with sugarcane. And the first thing that I had in my mind is, I'm not against chemical products. I'm in favor of going from a situation that is not so good to another situation that is better. And then we can go to see a different situation that's even better, and so on. It doesn't need to be organic. So my challenge is, if I'm good at agronomy, I want to have the greatest chemical challenges in the world, I want to solve them. And coincidentally, I don't know if there's a conspiracy of the universe, after some time, I started writing. If I'm going to apply this in some other cultures, I wrote it for 10 years, 15,000 pages. I have the illustrated manual. It's only no server, it's hidden, where I did the scientific basis for the chemical, biological, and mechanical, organic, everything's there. And this conspiration of the universe, a great producer called me and said, hey, we need to, you're here from Sapezal and have an issue that this year we applied 25 times of fertilizer and cotton, and it's ugly. Things are ugly here. I need help. Here it looks like a Novartis or a Syngenta factory. Can we visit your factory, your plant, to know a little bit what you do? And they were amazed, and they hired me as a consultant. Finally, they were able to hire me a consultant, and I volunteered them to go there, and I went to Sapezal, União do Sul, many cities, and I provided my contribution to them to create a regenerative agriculture project. It's a conventional project, not an organic project. And they applied it to 126,000 hectares of soy, corn, and cotton. And all the principles worked with the sugarcane, worked there as well. It's been to teach you that I'm going to plant soy. And I plant soil from organically, and I didn't have to apply any biodefensive. And we filmed it, and the pests could not digest the crops because of the same way as some other pests. And we did the same thing with corn. So then I said, okay, now I'm ready to help you. I did it with soy and corn, and we created a factory, and they applied so much acid fertilizers that consumes the organic matter of the soil, especially urea and potassium. You can use 1,000 tons of organic matter in the soil. It's not increase the organic matter in the soil. It has to decompose it biologically. And urea as well will consume your organic matter and acidify your soil. They were applying 10 to 12 tons of limestone per hectare, and 70% of that is just to neutralize the acidity that is being inputted by the acid fertilizers that we are importing. So we're sending money abroad to acidify our soil. Then we have to use more limestone, and this reduces the natural resistance of this plant. So the rate of limestone use ends in 40 years. And in our sewer we have nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium to bring it back. So we start using our waste and the sewer from the cities. We won't need a lot of fertilizers. We can reduce our dependency by 60%. I talked to mayors, to governors, and who is interested in using such sewer and such waste as fertilizers? Who is interested in that? Using biodefensives instead of insecticides. The use of products that I can produce myself at the farm other than patented products. And just to finish, I ended with that consultancy and 10,000 hectares in citrus in another place in the state of São Paulo. So 19% scent, 0.5% of organic matter. I removed the acid fertilizers, planted. We are using nitrogen from the air. We are sending it to the citrus. So this year they're reducing 16 million reais in fertilizers. Productivity increased, and the organic matter came from 0.5% to 2%. They fixed millions of dozens of tons of carbon in 3 years. They have a smile on their faces.
Oh, and that was done only once. Thank you, Leontino. Amazing. So, people have come up that I should be completing and wrapping up our session. So, Roberto, we have only 1 minute for you. Okay. Well, looking at Leontino speaking with such property about what he has to say, so Brazil, I believe, is ready for a new age of the agricultural development. I'd like to wrap up the panel saying that since 2009 I began working with the qualification of rural workers, because I think the inclusion is really important, because we have dozens of millions of people below the poverty line. These were people who suffered with the rural exodus, and there are also 2 billion people starving, people migrating, who are desperately trying to enter first world countries so that they can no longer starve. So I believe that the inclusion of rural workers is a global emergency that should be addressed. Thank you, Roberto. That was a privilege.